Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Wichita and Kansas government and public affairs. We're broadcast on KGPT channel 26.1, also the companion website kgpt26.com. Some of you may know me from my blog, that's the Voice for Liberty at wichitaliberty.org. The motto there is individual liberty, limited government, and free markets in Wichita and Kansas. So I cover things that may not be covered by other news media in Wichita and Kansas, or if we do cover the same news, I'll do it from the perspective of economic freedom, limited government, and individual liberty. These are the things that are important. These are also the things that are so often under attack by our governments, be it at federal, state, or local level. So please visit wichitaliberty.org. You can subscribe to the email newsletter. You can like the Voice for Liberty on Facebook, follow me, Bob Weeks, on Twitter, and if you'd like to contact me, my email address is easy to remember, bob.weeks@gmail.com. Just a quick note before we get started with this week's topics. You may remember David Bose of the Cato Institute appeared on Wichita Liberty TV some time ago. Just this week, he has a new book come out, The Libertarian Mind. It says, Revised and Updated Edition of Libertarianism, a primer. So that's just out this week. Well, this week on Wichita Liberty TV, the purchase of a piano by a Kansas school district teaches us a lesson. Instead of a system in which schools raise money voluntarily, that is, a system in which customers are happy to buy, donors are happy to give, and schools are grateful to receive, well, we have strife. So you may have seen the news. It made the front page of the Sunday Wichita Eagle. A Kansas City, Kansas school, a high school, has spent $48,000 to purchase a new piano, replacing one that's been in use for many years. Critics of school spending, even Kansas Governor Sam Brownback, well, they point to this as an example of school spending out of control. How can schools want more money, they say, if one school can spend $48,000 on a piano? Well, we can learn a few things about our public schools from this, and I think these are important lessons. First, there is really no way to tell whether this purchase was wise. And there are several reasons. First, the school is not spending its own money. Instead, it's spending other people's money and spending it in a near vacuum. It's spending in circumstances that are not amenable to wise purchases. Milton Friedman has developed a grid of the ways that money may be spent, and we've seen this before on Wichita Liberty TV. And the purchase of this piano falls into category 3, which is spending someone else's money on yourself. What incentive is there to be frugal in this circumstance? Second, the school is spending this money in an uncompetitive environment. In Kansas, the public schools have a near monopoly on the use of public funds for schools. No matter how bad the public schools may be, no matter how wasteful of funds, public schools know that parents have few alternatives. Yes, there are private schools in Kansas, but if parents choose them, well, they still have to pay the public schools. Who else can do that? What other industry has such monopoly power? Competition is important because it provides accountability. It provides a framework for making decisions about the allocation of resources. If we see, let's say, a grocery store spending lavishly on fixtures and furnishings, well, we may surmise that the store is trying to attract customers. The ultimate test of that strategy is profit. Do customers appreciate the store's investment enough to shop there? If so, profits may be earned. And if not, there will be losses, and store management has learned a lesson. In a similar fashion, if Kansas public schools faced meaningful competition for students, well, then schools would have a framework for making spending decisions, as well as for making many other decisions. But with no meaningful competition, Kansas schools are operating in the dark. They do not have the benefit of market competition and profit to let them know if they are making wise decisions about the allocation of resources. Now, I think I know what you may be thinking about the word competition. Market competition is not competition like a life and death struggle in the jungle or the seas, where the winners eat the losers. Market competition is also not a contrived event, as is a sporting event like a football game. Instead, market competition refers to a discovery process, where through mountains of voluntary transactions, we learn what works and what doesn't work. We don't have that learning process available to Kansas public schools. And the purchase of the piano has also stimulated much rancorous debate. People are yelling at each other, and this is over the education of children. Instead of fighting and strife, we should be celebrating children, schools, and education. But that's not the way government works. Money is taken through taxes. And I realize it's considered impolite in some circles to say this, but yeah, taxes are taken by the threat of force. And then that tax money is spent by people who pretty much say, screw you, to taxpayers. That is the tone, definitely the tone of an article written by the superintendent of the school district that bought the $48,000 piano. The real problem, she contends, is that the people of Kansas are not taxed enough. Yeah, not taxed enough, she says. It does not matter to her that spending per student in this school district is $15,388. Now, that's down from 2009 when it nearly touched $18,000, but much higher than the early years of this century when it was around $11,000. And these are inflation-adjusted per-student figures. Employment ratios in this school district have improved, and unspent fund balances, now that's not including bond and capital funds, have risen. Despite these improvements, the Kansas City School Superintendent says Kansans do not pay enough taxes to her schools, and I get the sense that she wants to fight for more. Do we fight over which grocery store is best for us? Do we fight over how much to spend on building and operating grocery stores? No. People peacefully and freely choose the store they like, and sometimes they choose several stores at the same time. I'm afraid that civil society is dying. Instead of a system in which schools raise money voluntarily, a system in which customers are happy to buy, donors are happy to give, and schools are grateful to receive, we have strife. Instead of a Kansas school superintendent saying thank you to taxpayers for the new piano and for $15,388 to spend each year on each student, we have something else. We have the gnashing of teeth, and that's a shame. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Last week I told you that I had attended a conference on school choice, and here's something I learned. We know that opponents of school choice programs argue that the programs harm school districts both financially and in their ability to serve their remaining students. I learned, however, that evidence does not support this position. If school choice programs, these are things like charter schools, vouchers, and tax credit scholarships, if they harm the existing public schools, well, that would be a reasonable argument against school choice, especially if the students who remain in public schools had less of an opportunity to learn. Now, the prevailing argument is that charter schools and other public school alternatives drain funds away from public schools. That is, if a public school student chooses a charter or private school, and if the money follows the student to the other school, well, then the public school district loses money that it otherwise would have received. Therefore, the public school district is worse off, and so too are its students. That is the argument of the public schools. Well, a rebuttal is that since a public school has shed the responsibility for schooling the student, its costs should also fall correspondingly. And this would be true if all of the costs of a public school are variable. But some costs are fixed, meaning that they cannot be adjusted quickly, that is, in the short run. An example is the cost to maintain and supply a classroom. If a school has one less student than the year before, well, it still requires the same support and spending for utilities. And one or even several fewer students does not mean that fewer teachers are needed. So, public schools and their lobbyists, therefore, argue that school choice programs are a financial burden to public schools. Under school choice programs, they say, public schools lose students and their accompanying funding, but the public schools are still saddled with their fixed costs. The question then is, what portion of a school's costs are variable, meaning costs that schools can adjust quickly, and what portion are fixed, meaning costs that may not be adjusted quickly? Benjamin Scafidi, a professor of economics at Kennesaw State University, he has examined schools looking for the answer to this question. And his paper titled The Fiscal Effects of School Choice Programs on Public School Districts, which is published by the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice, it holds answers to these questions. So the first question is this: what is the relation of school choice programs to school districts' variable costs? Scafidi has endeavored to determine the breakdown between variable and fixed costs in each state. Now, I don't want to bore you with calculations, so here's the upshot. For the school year ending in 2014, last year, total spending per student in Kansas was $12,960. Fixed costs per student were $4,251. Variable costs per student were much larger, $8,709. Now, how much money would a public school lose if a student chose, let's say, a private school under a voucher program? Well, in Kansas, we do not have vouchers for school choice, so we can't answer this question directly. We do know, however, that base state aid per pupil in Kansas is $3,852. That is the starting point for state spending per student. And in the presentation on this topic that I attended, Scafidi said, any school choice program where about $8,000 per student or less on average follows the child to the school of his or her choice, well, that improves the fiscal condition of the public school district on average, and students who remain in public schools have more resources available for their education. So, a typical Kansas school district has variable costs of $8,709 per student. Well, it has its fiscal situation improved when it loses a student and its $3,852 in state funding. And many Kansas students, however, trigger much more funding due to weightings that compensate for the purportedly higher costs of some situations. The largest weighting in Kansas, at least based on numeric magnitude, is the at-risk weighting. It adds 45.6% to base state aid. So if a Kansas public school loses such a student and weighting, it loses $5,608 in funding. But that is far less than its variable costs of $8,709. And on average, state funding for Kansas schools in the last school year was $7,088 per student, which is still less than school districts' variable costs. That means that, on average, when a Kansas school district loses a child to school choice, the district is better off financially. This is different from what the public schools and their spending advocates say. Well, so the question is, can school districts adjust their variable costs quickly in response to changing enrollments? And this may be a problem for the very smallest districts, those with just 1 or 2 teachers per grade. But in his paper, Scafidi illustrates 2 examples of districts in Georgia with just over 1,000 students that are able to make adjustments. Now in Kansas, there are 286 school districts, and of those, 207 have enrollment of less than 1,000 students, but only 20% of the state's students are in these small school districts. So yeah, some Kansas school districts are very small. Now, school districts often dispute the contention that they are able to reduce their variable costs rapidly in response to enrollment changes. Well, Scafidi notes that if school districts say they cannot reduce costs when they lose students, the implication is that all of their costs are fixed. And if that's true, then schools should not receive additional funding when enrollment rises. After all, if all their costs are fixed, costs do not change with enrollment, either up or down. We have seen that school choice programs do not harm the finances of local school districts. The second question concerns the quality of education for the students who remain in public schools. To answer this question, we must recognize the wide variation of teacher efficacy. Those who have looked at this find that some teachers are very good and some are very poor. Further, the difference between good and bad is large. Eric Hanishek and others have found that very good teachers routinely produce 1.5 years of gain in achievement during a single academic year. Bad teachers produce just 1/2 year of gain. If a student is unfortunate enough to experience ineffective teachers 2 or 3 years in a row, well, the student may be so far behind as to never catch up. Well, what does this have to do with school choice programs? If public schools have to downsize due to students lost for any reason, including school choice programs, this gives public schools an opportunity to shed their least effective teachers. This means that students who remain in public schools have a higher likelihood of experiencing the most effective teachers. These are the ways in which local school districts and their students are affected by school choice programs. They are not harmed. Instead, they, especially the students that remain in public schools, are helped. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. There are things both easy and difficult Wichita could do to make the city inclusive and welcoming of all, especially the young and diverse. Here's what I mean. In its questionnaire for candidates for Wichita Mayor and City Council, the Wichita Metro Chamber of Commerce asked this question: how will you work to make Wichita an inclusive community where all will feel welcome, particularly the young and diverse talent we need to help attract more young and diverse talent? Well, there are a few very easy things Wichita could do to appeal to millennials. I think that is one of the groups the Chamber addresses in its questions, and also diverse people. Millennials are usually thought of as being from about 20 to 35 years old, although there is no precise definition. Well, one thing Wichita should do is to support the decriminalization of marijuana. The City Council has reacted to a recent petition to reduce the penalty for carrying small amounts of marijuana by placing the measure on the April general election ballot. Another option the city had was to adopt the ordinance as submitted. That would have sent a positive message to millennials, but the City Council did not do that. Another thing Wichita should do: we should ask the state to positively end marriage discrimination and allow same-sex marriage. The city has a legislative agenda it prepares for state legislators each year, but this matter was not mentioned. Another easy thing. Wichita should reform its taxicab regulations so that ride-sharing businesses like Uber are operating fully within the law instead of outside the law as Uber is currently operating. Uber is an example of the type of innovation that city officials and civic leaders say we need, and millennials, at least the ones I know, love using Uber. But Uber has been operating in Wichita since August, and Uber has model legislation that could be adopted quickly by the city. Yet, 6 months later, the city has not acted. This delay does not send a message that Wichita welcomes innovation. Instead, it sends a message that the regulatory regime in Wichita is not able to adapt to change. Something else. We should pledge to resist the growth of the police surveillance state. No street surveillance cameras in Wichita, and no mass license plate scanning by police. And to the extent that there are problems with the Wichita Police Department, let's resolve them so that citizens feel safe and minorities feel welcome and not threatened. A citizen oversight panel that has real authority would be a good step. We should proceed quickly with the implementation of police body cameras. And we should end the special entertainment districts, which many feel are targeted at minority populations. Now here's a bad idea, but an indication of what passes for innovation at the Wichita Chamber of Commerce. And that idea is to pay down the student loan debt of young people. This is a bad idea on several levels. First, it rewards those who borrowed to pay for college. Those who saved, worked, or went to inexpensive colleges are not eligible for this benefit. Further, if we award this incentive, those who receive it might wonder if that someday they will be taxed to provide this benefit to other younger people. After all, the corollary of come to Wichita and we will pay down your student loan is stay in Wichita and you're going to have to pay down someone else's student loan. Now, if the Chamber wished to raise funds voluntarily to provide such a program, that would be fine. But no tax funds should be used for anything like this. Most of these things are relatively easy to accomplish. But here's something that is very important, something that should be easy to do, but something that goes against the grain of elected officials, bureaucrats, and civic leaders like those who run the Wichita Metro Chamber of Commerce. And that is, promote free markets instead of government management of the economy. A Reason Group survey of 2,000 Americans between the ages of 18 and 29, it found that millennials strongly prefer free markets over a government-managed economy. When asked to choose the better system, 64% of millennials chose the free market over an economy managed by the government. Also, this survey found that millennials are distrustful, believing that government acts in favor of special interest groups and that government abuses its powers. They also believe government is inefficient and wasteful. What could Wichita do in light of these findings? Well, one thing is to stop its heavy-handed regulation of development, particularly the massive subsidies directed to downtown Wichita. And we should take steps to make sure that everyone is treated equally. Passing pay-to-play ordinances, where city council members or county commissioners are prohibited from voting on matters that would enrich their campaign contributors. That would be a first step in regaining the trust of citizens. And we also need to reform our economic development practice to favor entrepreneurship. Millennials like to start businesses, the same survey tells us. It said 55% of millennials say they'd like to start their own business one day, and that hard work is the key to success. And millennials also have a positive view of the profit motive, 64% said that, and of competition, 70% agreed with that. So I sense a problem in Wichita, because I'd say most of our economic development practice consists of directing subsidies to our existing large firms or large firms we hope to lure here. But young and small firms, entrepreneurial firms in other words, cannot qualify for most of our incentive programs. For example, the programs that offer property tax abatements have lengthy application forms and other obstacles to overcome, plus annual fees to pay. Sometimes there are minimum size requirements. Young firms cannot suffer through this red tape and the accompanying bureaucratic schedules. These are things we could do to make Wichita more inviting. Some are really easy. Some should be easy, such as embracing free markets. But given the nature of politicians, bureaucrats, and the type of people who rise to positions of civic leadership like chairing the Wichita Chamber of Commerce, well, I'm afraid that some of these are not very likely to happen. Well, that's all the time we have this week for Wichita Liberty TV. Thank you for watching. I'm